Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful and today very wet neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very happy and so appreciative that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, your kids' teachers, the librarian, and also please subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Ashley Novoselski. She's here to celebrate Frustrated Fred. Before we invite Ashley in, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Snowmen and Halloween. Beautiful picture book by Carolyn and Mark Beener. Have you ever built a snowman and discovered the next day that his grin is a little crooked or that he's a little shorter than the day before? Maybe you've wondered, what do snowmen do at night when no one is watching? An autumn snowfall is a perfect opportunity for a boy and his sister to build some snowmen. But when she brings out a box of Halloween costumes, the snowmen have a chance to celebrate Halloween just like everyone else. This is a really, really fun picture book. The story is wonderful. The illustrations are absolutely magnificent. This is a book that you absolutely want on your family library shelves. It's Snowmen at Halloween. Perfect time of year to pick this book up. Snowmen and Halloween by Carolyn and Mark Beener. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is also brought to you by The Adventures of Toby Baxter, The River Elf, The Giant, and The Closet, written by Tim Wright. It's a Reading with Your Kids certified great read. He's ready to leave kiddom behind, but can Toby Baxter stand tall against an army of barf-inducing beasts? You and your kids are going to love reading The Adventures of Toby Baxter. I mean, Toby's can't wait to be a teenager. On the cusp of turning 13, the superhero-obsessed boy's jaw drops when a baffling stranger appears and begs him for help. But when he's led through a portal on a whirlwind trip to a magical land, he's terrified to be plunged mid-battle between elves and a legion of stinky trolls. I mean, come on, your kids, they're gonna love reading about barf-inducing beasts and stinky trolls and adventure and mystery, and you are gonna love it too. The Adventures of Toby Baxter, The River Elf, The Giant, and The Closet by Tim Wright. It's a great, great book, and it's a certified great read. Join us right now from the beautiful city of Erie in the state of Pennsylvania. Our guest today is here to celebrate her debut picture book. It's called Frustrated Gently here. The name of the book is Frustrated Fred. Please welcome to the show, Ashley Novoselski. Hey, Ashley, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing really good today. How are you doing?
Well, other than the fact that I got your name right, which I was afraid of, but I mangled the name of your book, I'm doing okay.
Oh, good. That's all right.
So, Frustrated Fred, tell us all about this book, please.
Well, I'm very excited about it. This is my first children's book that I've ever had published, and it is intended to be the first in a series of books that look at some trickier emotions that maybe some kids have, and let's face it, adults too, some hard time processing and identifying, let alone managing. I am a behavior specialist. I've been in the field for over 20 years, and I work with kids of all different abilities. And one thing that I've noticed in all of my years, but especially in the last handful, is really just how kids are not as equipped as I'd like to see them be in how to handle emotions. Mm-hmm. And so being a mom myself and having kiddos at the same age group kind of processing these things, we always try to do rhymey, fun, sing-songy things. And it sort of just came up one day of let's make this a book.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another. And in a very short, I got very lucky in a very short amount of time. This this vision kind of came to fruition. So.
Oh, neat. Now, you say you're a behavior specialist. Are you working in a school? Do you take private clients?
I actually am just transitioning positions right now, but I had worked for a local agency for about the last 12 years. So I'm in all different schools, community settings, homes, you name it. If a kiddo is in that setting, that's where I can provide those services.
Yeah. And you were mentioning that there are certain emotions that kids don't seem to be able to handle. Are there any in particular that you can kind of point out that kids these days are having trouble with this emotion?
Well, obviously, frustrated Fred was the emotion that I wanted to address first, because frustrated can look so different from person to person, and especially kid to kid. One of the things that I've done recently is toward the end of this school year was a lot of readings within classrooms and schools. And I would always open it up with, who can tell me what they feel like or what it looks like when you're frustrated. And the spectrum of what kids can identify, what to one looks like frustration is something completely different than what looks like to another. So it really isn't a one size fits all. And it's really a great way for me to step into it as not just as a professional, but also as somebody that's looking to, further the series. It really is completely different from person to person. And it was kind of great to see in each classroom how, Johnny might say, I feel like this when I'm frustrated. And then you see Susie over here go, oh, me too. I didn't know that's what that was. Mm-hmm. So you see these light bulb moments in real time. And I think it helps break down those walls to go, oh, everybody feels this way. Maybe it's different, but everybody feels that same way.
Yeah.
The next emotion, the next book that we have coming down the pipeline, deals with feeling anxious. Mm-hmm. Anxious, nervous, all of those things that kiddos, really don't have a label for, have a way to identify. So, and every time I go in a classroom, I get more suggestions on more emotions from kids. So I am taking them and running with them. So
I'm really curious. What's the most surprising emotion that a kid has mentioned to you?
I actually was very surprised to hear a couple kids mention just feeling anxious.
Yeah.
Because especially my target audience for this is, kindergarten through third, maybe fourth grade. So to hear some little ones, you figure a third grader, 7, 8 years old, 9 years old, to be able to say, I felt anxious about this. Mm-hmm. That's not something that I feel like when we were growing up, that wasn't really an emotion that most people identified. So the fact that there is becoming a little bit more social emotional awareness on those things, I think is really, really good.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that there were kids in my class almost 100 years ago that were feeling anxious. They just didn't have a label for it. They didn't know about it. Yeah. It's interesting that you use the word spectrum, that there was when you ask kids what frustrated, what it meant to them, there was a spectrum of answers. One of the things that we've talked about here in the podcast is that the number of kids, or the percentage of kids that are being diagnosed as being somewhere on the autism spectrum is really, it's exploded. It's gone from when I was in human services 30 something years ago, a kid on the autism spectrum was, had some very serious challenges and typically were nonverbal and did the rocking and all this. And now, I think there was a statistic that 1 in 64 boys are on the spectrum, and that just kind of blows my mind. Do you think that the number of kids that we're seeing who are anxious, feeling frustrated, having trouble dealing and processing their emotions, do you think it has something to do with the fact that there are more kids being diagnosed as being on the spectrum? Has there always been the same number of kids on the spectrum and we're just learning about it now, or are there actually more kids on the spectrum? I know I'm asking you like 1,000 different questions.
No, that's a loaded question, but that's actually something that I am very passionate about in working as a behavior specialist. I've actually specialized in all these years in autism. Mm-hmm. And I genuinely do with not just educational background, but my personal experience, I really do believe that it is a full broad spectrum. Now, yes, over the years, diagnoses have become way more prevalent. We're seeing it. But I am a personal believer that we are all somewhere on this spectrum. I can point out things in anybody that I know in my personal or professional life, and you can go, oh, that maybe would qualify. Oh, maybe that would qualify. And I think that that's important to note. That's why it is considered the autism spectrum disorder. Is there isn't, again, no one size fits all. We all maybe have idiosyncrasies that we don't notice, but then we look at it in children and go, oh, well, that's, that could possibly be a characteristic. Think about the individuals that tap their feet or click their pen or bite their nails, or, everybody kind of has their own thing. So I do think there's been more social awareness to it. I do think also that just because the way that society and life have become, where everyone has to be inundated with something and occupied 24/7, I think when people aren't anymore and you see this attention deficit or this inability to sit and concentrate, I think that possibly is diagnostic, but it's also related to environmental factors. And again, I think because parents have become so much more aware and involved and hyper focused on, what's wrong with my child? How do I fix this? How do I stay ahead of it? Or, more people are seeking out diagnoses as well. So it really is, there's a whole lot of different options and possibilities for why we have seen the increase over the years.
It is a fascinating topic that there's so much for us to still learn about.
Absolutely. I have, in over all of the years that I've done this, I have worked with hundreds of children, and I can tell you there is not one child that is even close to the same as another child. And you learn something from every single one of them.
Fascinating. Helping kids identify emotions and what they're feeling. I've shared this on the podcast in the past. My son, when he was younger, all of the negative emotions that he was feeling got turned into anger. If he was frustrated, it was anger. If he was sad, it came out as anger. If he was disappointed, it came out as anger. And I know it was difficult for us because we're dealing with this kid who was angry all the time. But I know it was difficult for him because he was angry and he didn't know how to deal with it because he didn't know what he was dealing with. And one of the things that really helped is when we sat down and said, what is it that you're feeling? Are you sad? Okay, well, let's try being sad. You don't have to be angry. It's okay to be sad. How can families who are kind of noticing these things help with their kids? I have a background in social work, and my wife's a teacher. So we had some of those skills from working with kids. I think most of the parents who are listening to this they haven't been a teacher for 34 years. They didn't work as a social worker for 10 or so years. How can they help their kids when they start noticing things? In addition to picking up your book and reading it with them, what other kind of things can they do?
No, that's a wonderful question. And I think that you're right. Really quick, I'll touch on the anger part of it. A lot of times anger is an emotion that we see it a lot more because it's a lot easier to feel. Anger is an easier emotion to feel than sad, than nervous, than frustrated, than anxious. Anger is an easier color to wear.
Why is that?
I don't know that I have a solid, perfect answer for. I just think it's one of those, you think about happy, mad, sad. That's sort of those primary colors of emotions. That's an easier one to feel. Or maybe if a child is, young enough that they're sad or feeling some sort of way but can't articulate it, well, I can be mad about that.
Yeah.
So it's just an easier emotion to it's a one size fits all when it comes to, I can be mad. I don't have to really explain it. And I think that's true for children and adults just the same. A lot of times there are way different emotions behind anger than just anger itself. Yeah. But as far as for parents, it can be intimidating and scary, but getting on their level literally sitting down, playing. Find what works for your child specifically. If your son or daughter loves drawing, let's draw a story. Let's draw how we feel when what does it look like on paper when I feel sad? What would my monster look like if it was angry? If they like Legos? Hey, if you built a Legoland that was sad, what would that look like? If you built a Legoland that was nervous, what would that look like? Really kind of take their interests and their strengths and apply it that way. And also, I think it's very important that parents have patience with kids. How many adults seek out counseling and are in counseling for years before they identify core emotions that are feeding into where they're at in life? To expect little ones to be able to articulate that effortlessly, that's not realistic. It's going to take some time. And I think too, a lot of times, if you just sit back and listen, we're so busy as parents telling them what to do and what not to do and what to eat and when to brush their teeth. And when they're people too, and they're sifting through all of this and sorting through all of this just the same. And they don't have the skills in the toolbox that we do, that we've taken years to get. So just give them some grace and give them some time. And also, I think it's important to identify your emotions as a parent, as an adult. Sometimes it can feel, I tell parents that I work with a lot of the times, in the beginning, it feels very cheesy. It feels very silly to kind of narrate, this is what I'm doing, or this is how I'm feeling. But it's so important because kids are sponges. And so good, bad, and indifferent, if they see that mom and dad are just human too, and they feel these ways sometimes, whether it's great or not so great, that's okay. And it makes it a better environment for them to feel those ways too.
Yeah. What an important reminder to our parents out there to allow themselves to be vulnerable, to allow our kids to see us as vulnerable. And I've talked a lot since the beginning of the podcast that if your kids have put you up on a pedestal, get off that pedestal as soon as you can, because you're not going to be able to maintain it forever. And you absolutely want to let your kids know when they're as young as possible that you're not perfect, that you struggle. Heaven forbid your kid gets to be 10, 11, or 12 years old, and then you fall off the pedestal, because it's you're in trouble.
Right. Yeah. If they've never seen mom and dad have any emotion, and then all of a sudden they're 12 years old and some drastic thing happens, they're not going to know how to process your emotion. And they're going to be so shocked that you have any other emotion besides being mom. And, it really is like, yes, there is that fine line between establishing authority and being the parent and child relationship and dynamic. But we are human, and our kids need to see that, whether we're embarrassed or nervous or sad, like that's okay. They need to see it, because the more they see it, the more it's going to be acceptable for them to feel that they can show those things too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay to be imperfect, parents.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that we've talked about and recently with one of our guests is just, it's much easier, and you can probably talk a little bit about this too. It's because of the way our brain works and develops, it's a lot easier to help our kids learn these skills when they're younger, as opposed to helping them learn it when they're in their teens or 20s or almost 100. We can still learn new things, but it's so much easier. Our brain is much more neuroplastic when they're young, as opposed to when they're getting older.
Absolutely. I mean, again, not to keep making this reference, but think about the percentage of adults that halfway through life start seeking out therapy and counseling to sort through decades of unresolved emotions. Teaching kids social emotional awareness and appropriate coping skills at a young age is going to do nothing other than benefit them and the ones that are around them and that are part of their lives. How many adults wish that we would have had these coping skills and processing abilities when we were younger, and it'd be saving, how many other relationships over the years that maybe were affected negatively because they didn't have those skills.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk, it makes perfect sense to most people to understand that it's a lot easier for a kid to learn a new language than it is for an adult. You start trying to learn how to speak Mandarin when you're 45 years old. That's going to be a challenge. When you're 4 years old, not as much. So it makes perfect sense that these skills are going to be easier for kids to learn when they're younger as opposed to when they're older.
Definitely. And that's a great analogy. I mean, learning how to speak your emotions should be no different than learning how to speak Mandarin. The sooner you learn it, the more fluent you're going to be, the better it's going to be, the easier it's going to be.
Yeah. I'm curious, you shared with us that you've been a behavior therapist for many years, for over a decade, and this is your first dip into the world of being an author. How did you enjoy the experience, and did you love it? Is it frustrating? You never want to do it again? Or?
I could not have had a smoother, more enjoyable experience working with Blue Balloon Books, working with my editor, Lauren, and just the whole team there, working with a phenomenal illustrator, Dusan. It's just been an absolute, I'm going to get emotional. It's really honestly been just one of the coolest things. And to be able to share it with our boys and say, you don't know how something's going to go unless you try, and to have them involved and invested and excited. And, it really has been such a personal success for me and a personal dream come true, but it's really been an awesome thing to be able to do as a family. And again, to show them that, no, it's not always perfect, and you have to make edits and you have to make revisions. And that's true whether it's a book or homework or life, and that's okay. But when you put in the work, look what can happen. It really has, it's been amazing as a behavior analyst, we do social stories all the time with our kids. How to brush your teeth, how to have, use nice words with friends, how to learn to tie shoes, all of these different abilities. And so to be able to take it and make it a more generally approachable subject and not just geared at one specific child or one specific thing it really has been fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm guessing too that obviously the parents who are struggling with a kid like my son when he was in middle school, with that kid who's always angry. Oh, absolutely need to sit down and talk to my kid about this and work through it. But I'm imagining it's just as important for us to work with our kids at helping them identify emotions, even when they're not in a crisis mode. When they seem to be happy and dealing with things, it's like we still got to talk to them about this so that life's going pretty good for them right now, but they're going to hit a bump in the road at some point, and they're going to need to have this vocabulary and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good point, too, because think about, again, just us as adults, I don't really want to sit and talk about why I'm angry when I'm angry. Maybe in the moment is not always the best situation to be trying to talk about those things. Talking about these kind of less than fun emotions sometimes, or maybe complicated emotions outside of really feeling like that, might also be a way to help those kids better process it in a more calm manner, so that when it does happen, we're not trying to put out the fire, we're trying to prevent the fire.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not always helpful to sit down with a kid who's raging and say, now tell me how you're feeling, Tommy.
Right. Yeah. How many of us would want to do that?
Hey, please tell us where we can go to find out more about Frustrated Fred and also find out more about you.
Absolutely. I know that obviously everybody can go to the Blue Balloon Books website, but the book is Frustrated Fred is currently available on Amazon. I am having this upcoming Sunday on short notice in Erie at the Experience Children's Museum. I'll be doing a book reading and signing. But it would be easiest for families to go ahead and get onto Amazon and purchase the book that way.
Wonderful. And are there places on social media where they can connect with you?
Yes. I mean, I don't have anything up and running yet from a professional standpoint, but I am on Instagram. I am on Facebook. I'm new to the world of TikTok, so I might leave that one to the professionals. But
I completely agree with you there.
Yeah.
It's an interesting world I'm not sure I want to visit too often.
Yep, I might just stay in my lane on that one.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I want to talk to you about when you come back to the show to celebrate the second book in the series is just talk about technology and whatnot and how that's affecting our kids and their emotions. But that'll be the next time you visit.
Absolutely.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of Frustrated Fred, the debut picture book from our guest, Ashley Novoselski. Hey, Ashley, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guests will be Dr. Susan Kumar and Spencer Walker. They'll be here to celebrate, but why do I have to have a vaccine? That's the next episode of the podcast. Hey, if you're the author of a fantastic children's book, please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of our newly remodeled website to find out how you can be a guest here on the podcast. Being a guest is fun, it's easy, it doesn't cost you a thing, and it gives you the chance to tell the world about your fantastic book in a long-form conversation. You can also learn how you can submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel. And you can find out about our monthly promotion program where we can celebrate your book with commercials here on the podcast, with messages to our 100,000 plus social media followers, display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards, and have your book with us at whatever event we are taking part in a given month. Learn all about that and more at readingwithyourkids.com. We want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Ashley Novoselski. Please be sure to check out Frustrated Fred. Also want to thank our sponsors, Snowmen and Halloween by Carolyn and Mark Beener. And, of course, The Adventures of Toby Baxter, The River Elf, The Giant, and The Closet by Tim Wright. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Nicole Bell Castro, Mirabella Q. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.